Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video. Sorry I've been a bit AWOL in the past week. I went to Copenhagen. It was lovely. It was cold, it was Christmassy, it was beautiful. Copenhagen is a lovely city, so I would recommend if you want to go there. But that's why you've had no videos in the last week. But I'm back with another midweek mystery for you guys, which I'm sure is your favourite kind of video anyway, so it's all good. Today we're going to be talking about the mysterious disappearance of a woman called Joan Risch. You may or may not have heard of this mystery. It is one of the more popular mysteries in the true crime community, but there's a reason that it's so popular. It's really crazy because all of the theories I'm going to mention at the end of this video, as I always do, there's always something which doesn't quite fit with the evidence. For every single theory, and there's a lot of them and they're all very different, there's just always something that doesn't quite click. But anyway, I'm going to start talking about it now. So it was late afternoon, October 24th, 1961, in a town called Lincoln in Massachusetts, when the police received a call about a missing woman called Joan Risch. The police had been contacted after her neighbour Barbara went over and found her house covered in blood. Joan was a 30-year-old woman who was married to her husband Martin, and together they had 2 children. They had 4-year-old Lillian and 2-year-old David, and they had moved to Lincoln about 6 months earlier. So let's get a little bit of history on Joan before we jump right in there. So Joan was born in 1930 in Brooklyn, New York. She was actually born as Joan Carolyn Bard. At 9 years old, her and her family moved to New Jersey, and just a year later her parents died in very suspicious circumstances, and they died in what the police called a suspicious house fire. After the fire, she went to live with some relatives and took on their surname Joan Natras, and that is the surname that she got all her social security number and everything in. And then she went to university. So bear in mind this was sort of 1950s that she would have gone to university. Women weren't as successful as they are now back then, so her going to university and getting a degree was a big deal. So she went to Wilson College in Pennsylvania and she got a degree in English literature. She went on to become quite successful in her career. She worked her way up the ranks in publishing and eventually became an editorial assistant. Don't worry, all of this information will be relevant later on in this video, but I figured I'd slip it in now because it's quite interesting to know somebody's background when you're learning about their disappearance. So for all intents and purposes, Joan was a very successful woman. She was an editorial assistant. That's where she met her husband Martin. However, after they got married, Joan left her job to become a homemaker and look after their 2 children. She always intended to go back to work after the children were grown. She spoke to friends about wanting to become a teacher, and she definitely wanted to get back out there in the world once her children were of a certain age. So let's fast forward to the day that Joan actually went missing, October 24th, 1961. That morning was pretty much like any other, apart from her husband Martin had to wake up very early to head to the airport because he was going on a business trip to New York. I think he woke up about 6:50, his flight was at 8 AM, so he was out of the house very early. And he was in New York for the day. And I think he planned to stay overnight as well, so he wasn't planning on returning until the next day. And for Joan, the day was like any other. She was woken up by the children and she gave them breakfast as usual, and then she took David over to a neighbour, Barbara Barker's house, because her and Lillian were going on a trip to the dentist's. So she took Lillian to the dentist. On the way home they stopped at the grocery store, and then they went back home and Lillian picked up David, I think at about 10:30. While she was out of the house that morning, both the postman and the milkman stopped by to deliver what they needed to deliver, and they said they didn't notice anything strange or suspicious. So the neighbour Barbara Barker that I've already mentioned a couple of times in this video is a very important person in this case. She was sort of the last one to ever see Joan, and their children got on very well. Their children played together a lot. So after Joan arrived home and she picked up David, Barbara's son Douglas actually went over to the Risch's home to play with Lillian because they were the same age. Douglas arrived home after a while and told Barbara that him and Lillian played in the garden on the swings, and Joan was there the whole time mowing the lawn and pruning the bushes. And then that afternoon, Lillian arrives on Barbara's doorstep and says that her mum sent her over to play with Douglas, which Barbara didn't think anything strange of it. Obviously it happened all the time. So she let Lillian in and her and Douglas played together for a little bit. And around this time, about 2:30 PM, is when the last ever confirmed sighting of Joan took place. Barbara said she was looking out of her window in her house and saw Joan in her own driveway, wearing a tan-coloured trench coat with her arms outstretched, holding something red, and she looked like she was kind of running. Barbara didn't think anything of it at the time. She just assumed that she was playing with David and sort of brushed it off. At about 3:45 PM, Barbara had some of her own errands to run, so took Lillian back over to her own house and just let her in, assuming that Joan was at home, and off she went to do some of her own shopping. Now Barbara arrived back home about 4:10 PM, and Lillian walks up to her. Now, a lot of places I've read about this says that Lillian came up to Barbara and said that Mummy's gone and there's red paint everywhere. However, I actually read the police reports for this case and like Barbara's own statement, and I couldn't read anything about Lillian saying there's red paint. What Barbara actually said in her statement was that Lillian said, "I can't find Mummy, David's in bed and the place is messed up." So I'm not entirely sure where the red paint thing came from. Maybe there is another source that states that, but I couldn't read that anywhere. Now, Barbara immediately knows that this isn't like Joan at all. Now, although like Barbara and Joan aren't best friends, they're neighbours, their children get on really well, so they have spoken quite a bit, and Barbara knew that Joan was a very devoted mum and she wouldn't have just left her children, so she immediately knew there was something weird going on. So Barbara walks over to the Risch house and sees that indeed the place is covered in blood. So she walks upstairs, finds David in his bedroom as usual, and then calls the police, and the police arrive within about 5 minutes. Sergeant Mike McHugh was the first police officer to arrive at the scene, and he found what Barbara had also found. Blood smeared all over the kitchen, the table was overturned, and the handset had been ripped off of the phone and placed in the waste bin. He called for extra backup, and these are the other clues that the police found in the house. So the post hadn't been brought in that day. There were about 4 letters in a post box at the end of the Risch driveway. Now, like I mentioned before, the postman had been earlier that day between 9:30 and 10:30, but Joan still hadn't brought the post in, which makes me think that maybe she was distracted by something else, or maybe she just never brought it in early and just intended to bring it in later. The phone directory was open in the kitchen to the page where the emergency numbers would usually be written. Now, at this point, 911 wasn't a thing, so in cases of emergencies you had to like write down your own emergency numbers for your area and call them. So although the phone directory was open to the emergency numbers page, there wasn't actually any emergency numbers written there. There was an empty liquor bottle and some beer bottles in the waste bin, and there were 3 bloody fingerprints and a handprint on the phone handset. Originally, I think for like a year or so, the police couldn't confirm if these fingerprints were Joan's or not. So for ages, it was just unknown. They could have been Joan's, it could have been another person's. However, quite a bit of time later, the police did actually find some of Joan's fingerprints and compared it with the fingerprints on the handset and said that the fingerprints were not Joan's. Somebody had tried to clear the blood up. There was a pair of David's sort of coveralls smeared in the blood as if somebody had been using them to try and clear up the blood, and there's also a roll of paper towels on the floor. Now, the coveralls looked like they had sort of been squished into the ground, like somebody had been laying on them, like there was a heavy weight on top of them, which the police obviously found very suspicious. There was also a wire hanger found on top of Joan's car. Police said that although the bloodstains may have been the result of a struggle, it also looked like it could possibly been somebody wandering around after having injured themselves and just leaving a trail of blood behind them. Now, a lot of reports on this case make it out like there was a load of blood. However, the reports I've read say it was probably between about a pint and maybe half a pint of blood, so there really wasn't that much. Police said it was actually consistent with maybe a nosebleed or something like that. And the police were unable to determine if this amount of blood could be consistent with her death. Obviously, there was the blood in the kitchen smeared over the floor and on the wall, but there was also blood outside of the kitchen. So there was 1 drop of blood on the first step on the staircase, 2 drops at the top of the stairs, there were 8 drops of blood in the master bedroom, 1 drop in the children's bedroom, sort of near the window, and there was also another trail that led out of the kitchen into the driveway, and the sort of trail stopped at Joan's car. On Joan's car, there was 3 different sort of blood stains. There was 1 on the right rear fender, 1 on the left side of the hood, and there was 1 on the very centre of the trunk around the back. And police were unable to determine where this bleeding started. But something I found quite strange is that the only room in the house really that didn't have any blood in was the bathroom. And if you have injured yourself and you're covered in blood, you sort of head straight to the bathroom to try and clear yourself up. Police questioned the neighbourhood and the surrounding sort of neighbourhoods, and something important to keep in mind in this case is Lincoln was a very small town. It had a population of about 3,000. Everyone kind of knew everyone. So at 2:45, a woman was seen wearing clothes similar to the clothes that Joan was last seen in, with a sort of handkerchief tied around her head. She was walking north side along Route 2A. She appeared to be wandering aimlessly, hunched over, in a lot of pain, and she was very untidy. And then about 3:15 to 3:30 that afternoon, a similarly dressed woman in a trench coat with blood running down her legs was seen walking north on Route 128. She seemed disorientated and she was cradling something at her stomach. and there was a third unconfirmed sighting around 4:30 p.m. Now, these sightings definitely sound like they could possibly be Joan and that she was in a lot of distress and a lot of pain. However, from what I've read online, a lot of people say that these routes aren't really consistent with each other. I think one of the routes, I'm not sure, I think it was route 128, was about a 2-mile walk away from her home, and it's a very steep uphill walk and then a sudden drop. It's a very hilly area from what I've been able to gather, and so if Joan was indeed in a lot of pain, would she have been able to walk that far in a short amount of time? Nobody really knows, because if you think about it, there's a very short time slot in which Joan has to go missing here. She went missing from about 2:30 to 3:45. Another very important piece of evidence in this case is a car. So the daughter of the Risch's next door neighbour, a girl called Virginia Keane, was walking home from school, probably about 3:15 that afternoon, when she saw an unfamiliar car in the Risch's driveway. She said it was a sort of two-tone blue car. It was quite dirty. She hadn't seen it before. Obviously, being the Risch's next door neighbour, she would have been familiar with what cars they had, and this was one that she'd never seen. Another local resident from one of the surrounding neighbourhoods was driving down the Risch's road and stopped to let a car out. Now, they couldn't determine whether the car they let out was coming out of the Risch's driveway or the Keanes' driveway, but the Keanes said they were home at the time and they had no cars in their driveway, so it would have had to have been the Risch's driveway that this car was backing out of. Police followed all of the leads they could, but didn't really come up with anything for about a year. A local reporter called Serene Gerson was researching Joan's case. I think she wanted to write an article on it, and she went to the library to do some research. She was looking at similar cases to Joan's, and she read a book about the disappearance of Brigham Young's 27th wife. Brigham Young, I think, was one of the founders of the Mormon Church. They had a lot of wives, and one of his wives had gone missing, and there was a book written about it. And Serene was reading this book, where she noticed this book had actually been checked out in the summer of 1961 by Joan Risch. So this piques her interest, and she looks at some other books in the true crime section, and she comes across a book called Into Thin Air, which was a book about a woman who orchestrated her own disappearance, leaving bloodstains and bloody towels behind. In that book was also written Joan Risch's name as having checked it out. She reported her findings in the newspaper, and a group of volunteers came forward to look through the rest of the library books, and they actually found that Joan had checked out over 25 books about mysterious disappearances. This led a lot of people to believe that Joan had staged her own crime scene, but we'll get to that later. Now let's talk about some theories. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, this is such an interesting case because for every theory there's something that negates it. You just cannot put all of these pieces together to create one round solid theory. There are so many things that could have happened here. First up, I'm going to talk about Joan's husband, Martin Risch. He has nothing to do with this, and it is pretty obvious from the get-go he had nothing to do with it. He was in New York, he had an airtight alibi, he went on quite a lot of business trips, he was quite a successful man, and him and his wife were known to be a very loving, happy couple. So he had nothing to do with it. I know people always go for the husband or the boyfriend first, but Martin was genuinely totally clear. So let's talk first about the theory that Joan did orchestrate her own disappearance and ran away. Now, obviously it is because these people found all of these true crime books with Joan's name written in it that made people start to think that maybe she had orchestrated this by herself. Now, I don't know about you, but clearly I myself research a lot of true crime. I read about a lot of mysterious disappearances. It's just something that some people are interested in, me and probably you if you're watching this video being one of those people. I'm constantly joking that if somebody was to look at my browser history on my MacBook, they would think that I had some things very wrong with me because of the amount of death and disappearances and murder that I read about. But that isn't the case. It's just something that's interesting, and Martin, Joan's husband, said that it was something that Joan was very interested in as well. I think she just got unlucky that she actually had it happen to herself. But why would Joan want to run away? A lot of people said that Joan was a very successful woman in her own right. Before she had kids, before she married Martin, she was very successful in her field. She had her own degree and she was good at what she did, and people said that they were quite shocked when she did decide to leave her job and just raise her children. But again, on the other hand, a lot of people said that Joan was devoted to her children and she loved them so much and she would have done anything for them, and she was intending to go back to work after the children were grown. But let's say maybe that Joan did get bored of raising her children and she wanted her own freedom again. Maybe she did decide to orchestrate her own disappearance. Maybe the fact that she spent all summer reading books about this kind of thing egged her on to do so. Now, from what I've been able to read online, Lincoln was a place where people went for privacy. People didn't really like to be too much in others' business, and it was kind of a place for the elite as well. People who lived in Lincoln were very successful, had quite a lot of money, and maybe Joan just felt kind of out of place. And she wanted that for herself, and so she orchestrated her own disappearance and disappeared. However, this theory doesn't make sense with the fact that there were foreign fingerprints on the phone, and she seemed very happy. Nobody thought that she would ever do something like that. It was only when people started to find the crime books that she had been checking out the library did people get the idea that she could have done this herself. I personally don't think she orchestrated her own disappearance. I don't think she ran away. I think something happened to her. The next theory I'm going to talk about is definitely the most popular one when it comes to talking about this case, and that is a botched abortion. The first thing you probably think of is the hanger that was found on top of Joan's car. The hanger is kind of, I don't want to say an urban legend when it comes to abortion, because wire hangers have been used to do abortions in the past, and probably in the present as well in some very sad cases. However, back then, if a doctor was called for an abortion, it wasn't always likely they were going to use a hanger to do so, and also if hangers were used, I'm sorry, this is very graphic, they're sort of stretched out and they're not left in the hanger shape. The hanger found on top of Joan's car was just still a regular hanger. I think it's most likely, to be honest, that the dry cleaner probably dropped it or left it on top of her car. An abortion would possibly explain the blood in her house, and maybe the reason she sent Lillian over to Barbara's house was because she knew she had a doctor coming over to do this procedure. Now, why would Joan want to have an abortion? Now, this is a very interesting thing, because clearly she already had 2 children. David was 2 years old. It was kind of the perfect time for her and Martin to have another child. Something I've read quite a lot is maybe Joan was having an affair. Now, although I said Lincoln's a very small town and people do like their privacy, it is a small town, and I've read accounts online of people saying they grew up in the town, and back in the 60s, everyone was having affairs with everyone. And although Joan and Martin had only moved there 6 months earlier, I'd say there's plenty of time for Joan to meet somebody, have an affair, and accidentally fall pregnant. Maybe Joan realised she was pregnant, realised she can't have this child because maybe she didn't know who the father was, and so panicked and called a doctor. Another thing that supports this theory is the fact that she had been to the dentist earlier that day, and dentists can often tell if a woman is pregnant by their gums. So maybe only that morning had Joan found out she was pregnant when her dentist had told her that her gums were really soft and asked her the question. Let's say a doctor does come to her house in a 2-toned blue dirty car and does the procedure, only it goes wrong and Joan starts to bleed a lot. Joan goes to the kitchen to try and call the emergency services because she's panicking, and then maybe the doctor comes in and rips the phone out of her hand because he can't be caught doing illegal back alley abortions. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe the doctor panicked and went to call the emergency services, and Joan ripped the phone out of his hand because she couldn't let anybody find out that she was having an abortion. Now, there's 2 scenarios here. Maybe the doctor leaves in a panic and Joan tries to clean up the blood that she's left everywhere. But she gets disorientated, doesn't know what to do, panics. She walks to her car to drive to the hospital, but as she's walking to the car, she realises that she can't and she's not in the right place to be driving. And maybe this is where people spotted her walking along the roads in pain. Or another scenario here is maybe the doctor took Joan in his own car. Maybe she'd already died at this point, or maybe she was just so disorientated and the doctor bundled her into his car to dispose of her. The only thing in this that doesn't quite strike me as true is if Joan was sort of going to the hospital, even if she was disorientated, she probably wouldn't have left David just in his crib upstairs. I don't know, she was like a very good mother and that doesn't strike me as something that she would have done, but you never know in her disorientated state. Another thing in this that doesn't strike me as being right is that if Joan was having an abortion, it is so unlikely that a doctor would come to her own house. Why would she, in broad daylight, want a doctor to come to her house and carry out this abortion? Abortions were known as back alley abortions for a reason. They were done in privacy, they were done in places where they weren't going to be caught and found, and I just don't think a doctor would have wanted to go to Joan's house to do it, and I don't think Joan would have wanted a doctor to come to her house to do it, because she did have neighbours. Barbara saw her in the driveway, so it's clear that people are watching her a lot of the time. And if she was doing it in private, I don't think she would have called a doctor to her house to do it. In a similar vein to the abortion theory, there's also a lot of people that talk about a possible miscarriage. So maybe Joan started to miscarry and panicked, and again tried to get to a car to drive, realised she couldn't, and then started to walk. Again, I don't think she would have left David. I don't know why she wouldn't have maybe told somebody. It doesn't explain why the phone had somebody else's fingerprints on it, but maybe she called a doctor to come to her house because she realised she was bleeding, and a doctor arrived quite quickly. Maybe something happened to her and she tried to call these services again, and the doctor panicked and said no, she can't. I do think an abortion is more likely than a miscarriage because it just doesn't quite fit with as many facts. But it would explain the blood, and it would explain a disoriented state of Joan. Something else, again along a similar vein to that, is something that I haven't actually read online, but I want to throw it out there because I thought it could be a possibility, maybe. A possibility is that maybe she actually gave birth. Now, obviously she didn't have a belly, she wasn't pregnant to the point that other people knew, but I personally know people that have given birth to a healthy baby at 9 months and they have not shown any sign whatsoever of being pregnant. I know of 3 people that has happened to, and it is bloody terrifying, can I just say. So maybe Joan actually gave birth to a child, only the child was stillborn. Now this could possibly explain Joan's disorientated state, which is why she started walking. It could explain what she was cradling to her stomach as she was walking along one of the routes. It could also explain what Joan was holding in her outstretched arms when she was running in her driveway. Barbara said that she was holding something red, and that could have been maybe a baby. It is possible for her to have been pregnant and had no idea and just given birth, but it is also possible that the baby was stillborn, which would explain why it wasn't a happy occasion. We could explain what happened to Joan and she went missing. Now along both the routes that Joan was seen walking along, there was a lot of construction going on at the time, so it is a possibility that she could have fallen into one of the excavation pits and been accidentally buried alive, or just died in one of the pits. The only thing this doesn't really explain is the blue car in the driveway, unless this happened to her and she called a doctor, but it doesn't explain why the place would be in such a state with the table turned over and the handset ripped out of the wall. There are things that don't fit, but I do quite like the theory, possibly because I thought of it myself, but I do know it's a thing that happens. The final theory is that somebody actually did hurt her and there was an intruder possibly in her house. If she, say, was having an affair, maybe she invited her boyfriend round to her house and they had a bit of an altercation and Joan ended up getting hurt. That would explain the blue car, it would explain the fingerprints on the handset, it would explain why it was ripped out of the wall. But there's no proof that Joan was having an affair, it is just speculation at this point. But I do think it is very likely that somebody was in her home who did hurt her. That could also be the reason why Joan sent Lillian over the street. She knew she had her boyfriend coming over. But it could also be a coincidence that she sent Lillian over the street and then somebody unrelated, not a boyfriend, just a random intruder, came into her house and attacked her. Now, the amount of blood in the house isn't consistent with a death or a murder. It's consistent with that of a nosebleed. So it is unlikely that if Joan was murdered, it was in the house. There's a very big possibility that she was injured, maybe hit over the head or, I don't know, stabbed slightly. Can you stab someone slightly? Maybe just a little bit of blood. And then she was bundled out into a car and driven away to be murdered properly. Maybe someone came into her house for money, but the police discovered that after she'd been to the dentist and done her grocery shopping and stuff, she would have had on her the equivalent of about $10, so it wouldn't be enough for an intruder to want to steal. It's not enough for somebody to murder her over. Or maybe somebody got mad when they realised she didn't have money to give them and then hurt her. I'm going to try and round the video up there because although there would be more theories to talk about, I feel like that's a good round amount of theories there. Let me know down below which one you think is the most likely. I do think that the abortion is most likely in this case, and she wasn't murdered by anyone. I just think maybe she wandered out of the house and her body's just never been found, which is very unlucky. I am going to read you the police statement from this. The police statement says, "There is no specific evidence that victim was abducted. A possibility exists that she may have hemorrhaged or caused a self-inflicted wound and left residence herself. Police theorise the possibility that she may have become mentally ill, but victim has no history of such illness." And I will leave that there because let me know what you think. There are so many interesting theories that you could talk about, so please make sure you do in the comments down below. If you did like this video, please make sure you give it a thumbs up to let me know, and make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'll have a new midweek mystery video out next Wednesday. Actually, I might not, because that's only 2 days after Christmas, so I probably won't have time to film it. But we'll see. Maybe, maybe not. I'll have a midweek mystery up next week. But I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas, and I will see you when I see you. Bye.